Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, April the 21st, 2021. The title of today's show is Sauve Peut, which is a French expression, which literally means save yourself if you can. More colloquially, it means every man for himself. And I think that is the situation in America today. Let me explain. I have been speaking about this for the last several years, and I suppose people think that it was hyperbole. I don't know whether people would disagree now. A lot of people would disagree, but I'm talking of people on the right. It is held by Black people in the United States, and it is held by the Democratic Party, by the media, by the elite generally, that America is systemically racist, and that America is in the grip of white supremacy. The police forces across America are illegitimate because of white supremacy and systemic racism. It doesn't matter whether the police department is run by a Black man or woman, and it doesn't matter whether officers are involved in any arrest are Black. No. They are by proxy agents of white supremacy. You've heard calls for defunding the police, and you thought that this was, again, hyperbole. Well, no, it wasn't. So given that, in the eyes of the elite, and even in the eyes of Joe Biden, that America is systemically racist, always has been. In fact, it's founded in 1619 on systemic racism and white supremacy, and that the police departments are illegitimate. What this means is that no Black person in America can be rightfully arrested by the police if he or she doesn't want to be arrested. But conversely, any police mistreatment of Black people, real or imagined, must be punished to the full extent of the law. And given the three charges that Derek Chauvin was convicted of yesterday, looking at mandatory sentence guidelines, that means he's going to spend 29 years in prison, effectively the rest of his life. You know, there's a novel by Michel Houellebecq called Submission, and it describes the Muslim takeover of France. And Houellebecq explains at the beginning of the book that there has been an eerie silence in France regarding Muslim activities, terrorist activities, crimes, etc., etc. And the reason for that is that the media, acting in concert with the government, decided simply not to report them any longer. You can't complain about what you don't know about. When the Muslim takeover actually happens, all of the communications in France are shut down. Radio, TV, internet, they're all shut down. Once again, you can't complain about what you don't know about. And I think that this is coming to America, and coming to America soon. Again, if you think this is hyperbole, consider Portland, Oregon. There has been an ongoing insurrection in that city for more than a year. Do you ever read about it in the national media? Do you ever read about this in the New York Times or the Washington Post or see it on CNN? No, you don't. And in fact, for most people, if they want to find out what is going on in Oregon, well, they can get it from Andy Ngo's Twitter feed, or they can get it from Dennis Dale's Twitter feed, or his blog, or perhaps something might appear in Breitbart. But effectively, news of this insurrection has been suppressed in America. And I suspect that, I don't know, if Columbus, Ohio goes up in flames, or Detroit goes up in flames, or any number of cities go up in flames, we will see We might see peaceful protesters on CNN and the other channels, but we are not going to see the rioting because Joe Biden is in charge now, and this might not look good for him. When Donald Trump was in charge, well, then it was a different situation because Trump, the dictator, had lost control of the country. There was the resistance had decided to take action, just action. But no, it's different with Biden. And if things truly get out of hand this summer in America, I suspect that the news media, perhaps acting in conjunction with the government, will simply stop reporting, and they will move swiftly against social media accounts which do the reporting. And if necessary, I think that they would put Fox News off the air, claiming that Fox News constitutes incitement, or they would put OAN off the air for the same reason. Every man for himself. Well, we know now that the police in America have no reason to protect you or your property. Violence against property is not violence, is the line now. So I suppose it would behoove people, if they have the means, to move out of big cities, perhaps even medium-sized cities. And also it would behoove people, if they have the means, to take their children out of public school. I know that's already happened to a large extent in America, but the private schools and the Catholic schools are no better than the public schools. It's a tremendous sacrifice, but if you don't want your children's minds to be poisoned in various ways, then you can still homeschool them. That is still legal in America. Also, perhaps this is the most important piece of advice I could give. ABA, always be avoiding. Cross the street if you have to. Leave the neighborhood temporarily if you have to. Stop going out on certain holidays because of high likelihood of violent mischief taking place. So, hello to Dan, Prussian Junker, He's Stahl, Gamayan, Paucaso 88, Chogokin 666, and William Hicks. This is out of left field from Buddy. Kevin, are you as fond of 70s, 80s Linda Carter as you should be? Well, gorgeous woman. That's all I can say. Oh, Paucaso 88 says, are Alex Berenson's novels any good? I've never read any of them. I suppose I'll have to do something about that. And hello to Goose. I think it was David Pinson. I'm not sure. But he said that he predicted that if Joe Biden wins the election, that America will become like South Africa. And I think this is coming true. And it's coming true quickly. It's a funny thing about the media, that they just couldn't get enough of South Africa and the evil apartheid system. Well, the whites gave up. They handed over the government to Nelson Mandela. And shortly thereafter, South Africa became the rape and murder capital of the world. But the media's job was done, and you read very little about South Africa in the media. I could hardly believe this when I saw it. This is very close to jury tampering. This is from American Greatness. Enemy of the People, Minneapolis Star-Tribune publishes biographical information of Derek Chauvin's trial jurors by Deborah Heine. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune is being blasted online for releasing biographical information of all 12 jurors plus 2 alternates in the Derek Chauvin trial in the killing of George Floyd. Without naming the jurors, reporters Paul Welsh and Hannah Sale on Tuesday published enough details about their lives, internet sleuths and local snoops may be able to figure out who they are. Walsh is a general assignment reporter at the Star-Tribune, and Sale is a digital features editor. Online critics are accusing the paper of trying to intimidate the jurors into reaching a guilty verdict. The reporters provided general information about the jurors' ages, race, professions, where they're from, and where they went to school. They even leaked that one juror is related to an area police officer. Abby Simone, the public safety editor for the Star Tribune, shared the story on Twitter. Public safety editor. I didn't know that incitement was considered to be part of public safety. Steve Cortez tweeted in response to Abby, pure intimidation tactics. The corporate media is the enemy of the people. Rachel Bovard tweeted, this is jury intimidation. I don't think it can be regarded in any other way. That the news would get to the jurors, that Maxine Waters is demanding a confrontation, and that the mayor says that Chauvin is guilty, and the president of the United States says that he is guilty. So you know what you have to do, and you will do so, or you will know the reason why. Okay. But it's never enough. It is never enough. So the conviction of Derek Chauvin, is it time for healing in America? No. Because it is never enough. This is from the Associated Press. President Joe Biden said Tuesday the conviction of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin in the killing of George Floyd can be a giant step forward for the nation in the fight against systemic racism, but he declared that, quote, it's not enough. We can't stop here, unquote. Biden and Harris called on Congress to act swiftly to address policing reform, including by approving a bill named for Floyd, St. George Floyd, who died with his neck under Chauvin's knee last year. Actually, it was his back, not his neck, but one can't expect the Associated Press to worry about niggling details like that. Beyond that, the president said the entire country must confront hatred to change hearts and minds, as well as laws and policies. I can't breathe. Those were George Floyd's last words, Biden said. We can't let those words die with him. We have to keep hearing those words. We must not turn away. Kamala Harris, the first Black woman to serve as vice president, says racism was keeping the country from fulfilling its founding promise of liberty and justice for all. It's not just a Black America problem or a people of color problem. It is a problem for every American. It is holding our nation back from reaching our full potential. A measure of justice isn't the same as equal justice, which apparently white people have not been giving Black people. Black people have no agency. They're helpless victims and always have been. So it would be irresponsible, in fact, out of the question, to consider them in any way responsible for any of these cases, such as George Floyd. What did Nancy Pelosi have to say? Well, Chris Cillizza of CNN is not very happy with her. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi had months and months to ponder what she would say if and when former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was convicted of the murder of George Floyd. What makes what she did say on Wednesday in the immediate aftermath of the Chauvin verdict all the more baffling. Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice, Pelosi said at an event with the Congressional Black Caucus shortly after the verdict. For being there to call out to your mom, how heartbreaking was that? And because of you, your name will always be synonymous with justice. Cillizza says, clearly, this is a poorly constructed line. Floyd didn't want to sacrifice his life. Pelosi's comment seems to bizarrely suggest that Floyd had some choice in the situation, when in actuality he had zero say or control over whether a police stop would end in his death. That is an outright lie. George Floyd resisted arrest twice, tussled with the officers. If he had not done that, he would very likely be alive today. Cillizza continues, while Floyd's death sparked a national movement aimed at examining and reforming race and policing. Oh, is that what it is? The best outcome for Floyd and his family would be that he was still alive. Well, Floyd's family would be short 27 million smackers if George Floyd were still alive. And while the verdict reached Tuesday gives his family some sort of closure after such a heartbreaking and terrible year-long ordeal, racial profiling by police remains a huge and unacceptable injustice in this country. Yes, once again, it is never enough. Pelosi sought to clean up the mess she had made. She took to Twitter, writing this: George Floyd should be alive today. His family's calls for justice for his murder were heard around the world. He did not die in vain. We must make sure other families don't suffer the same racism, violence, and pain, and we must enact the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Of course, when white people are killed by black people in the United States, and there are many more white people killed by black people in the United States than vice versa, that is not racism. No, it is not, because black people, by definition, are incapable of racism. Racism is solely a white thing. This is from Julie Grace Brufke at the New York Post. Attorney General Merrick Garland announced Wednesday that the Justice Department is opening a sweeping investigation into policing practices in Minneapolis a day after former officer Derek Chauvin was convicted in the killing of George Floyd. Yesterday's verdict in the state criminal trial does not address potentially systemic policing issues in Minneapolis, Garland said. Today, I am announcing that the Justice Department has announced a civil investigation to determine whether the Minneapolis Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of unconstitutional or unlawful policing, he said in remarks at the DOJ without taking questions from the press. This effort will be staffed by experienced attorneys and other personnel from the Justice Department Civil Rights Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Minnesota. Well, this is clearly a stitch-up, that the charge is the crime. And I suppose the Minneapolis police chief, who threw his 4 officers under the bus, might be in for some difficulty. And that's one little moment of levity here. Revolver has a piece on this. Derek Chauvin believed in the system. Now he's paid with his life. Barring a miracle in the appeals process, Chauvin will spend decades, if not the rest of his life, in prison. It's unjust and unfair, the greatest travesty of the criminal courts since O.J. Simpson went free 2.5 decades ago. Mob rule has taken over in America, which means that law and order is dead, and the constitutional right to due process has been shredded beyond recognition. It's not so much the left-wing mob knows they can tamper with juries and judges with impunity. Rather, the mob is incited to tamper with judges and juries by the press arm of the global American empire with the full weight and backing of the ruling class governing establishment of the global American empire. If there is any bright spot to what happened today, it is this: Americans should be completely purged of the illusion that a fair and just system still exists that will protect them from the predations of the globalist American empire. There is no fair system of law and order in America. There is only the arbitrary application of power for political purposes. No proof was ever offered that Chauvin's knee killed George Floyd because no such proof could ever be offered. The very notion was ridiculous. Floyd died from a lifetime of health-destroying decisions coupled with the lethal amount of drugs in his system. If Floyd hadn't died on camera, nothing would have happened. Instead, for political expediency, Chauvin was made into a human sacrifice. He was disowned by the state he served and the public he protected. He was never going to receive a fair trial. Trial Judge Peter Cahill refused to sequester the jury pool. Every juror was free to see Minneapolis hit by its third wave of riots after the accidental shooting of Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center. In fact, one of the jurors lives in Brooklyn Center. Every juror could hear Representative Maxine Waters demanding a more confrontational approach from demonstrators if they gave them the wrong verdict. Every juror could read the New York Times article profiling them, sending the unsubtle message that if they didn't convict, they'd be the next targets of the mob. Against every principle of justice and legal fairness, Derek Chauvin was successfully tarred as a murderer. Now he will likely suffer a murderer's fate. Minnesota's criminal justice system spent millions to ensure Derek Chauvin was crushed, bringing in 11 ringer private attorneys to augment the state's attorney. That same system sat pat while mobs destroyed downtown Minneapolis last summer and burned down a police station. Other states are doing the same. In Georgia, Officer Garrett Rolfe is still being prosecuted for shooting Rayshard Brooks, who stole a taser and tried to use it on Rolfe. Police will get the message. If they use any kind of force to stop a fleeing suspect or restrain one resisting arrest, the state will not protect them. It will side with the criminal. So the rational question is, why even be a police officer? Thousands of officers are asking themselves that and giving the rational answer. In Minneapolis, nearly 1/4 of the force quit or went on leave in 2021. In New York, police retirements doubled. Criminals have received the same message. They know that if they run from police, they will not be pursued. If they fight back, they will not be punished. Taxpayers' funds will be spent to compensate injured criminals, while what's left will be used to pursue criminal charges against police. If criminals riot, the streets will be abandoned to let them plunder at will. Unsurprisingly, crime has exploded. Murders are up by 1/3. In cities like DC, carjackings have quintupled compared to the same time last year. Yes, what are the rich going to do? Well, I suppose the rich are going to start acting as rich people in South America do. They're going to live behind armored, heavily fortified compounds, not armored, but heavily fortified. And there will be increasing use of private police to maintain order in gated communities. The COVID-19 hysteria has given us all an excuse not to leave the home, but I suspect that we're going to be seeing a great deal more of this from everyone, including the rich, and especially the rich. What does William Briggs have to say? So the jury convicted Chauvin of both murder and manslaughter of the same man. He was found guilty of 2 murder counts, not just 1, and 1 manslaughter. How is this possible? I ask in ignorance. Some lawyers who read this blog might enlighten us. The realpolitik answer is encapsulated in Maxine Waters, that heinous, race-baiting, evil, grifting, greedy mediocrity who promised violence if the jury did not bring a guilty verdict. Waters, that is, swore to unleash a wave of colors to teach the jury a lesson. It wouldn't have been hard to find the jurors. The enemies of the people at the Minneapolis Star-Tribune published their information. Biden, waking from his slumbers, prayed for a guilty verdict. In his favor, he likely didn't know what the flap was about. He was just mouthing the words put in front of him. Still, Chauvin could not have expected justice when the entire elite and rulers were against him. Immediately after, the enemies of the people began weighing in. On CBS News Radio, a female was saying officials were worried outside agitators might come in because of the verdict, and she never finished the sentence. She also said that the verdict had to be guilty given the video. She meant the video touted everywhere in the press and not the other video showing Chauvin had his knee on St. Floyd's back and not neck. Elsewhere, the ruler's Mutaween, the religious police known as BLM, was out threatening trucks, shouting F the National Guards, and generally behaving as thugs behave. Pandering, i.e. appeasement, never works. It always makes things worse. Who doesn't know this? Yet it doesn't mean the debased are not going to stick with it. They are, and they will ramp it up. The enemies of the people at MSNBC are already saying the unjust verdict is not enough. Even lynching Chauvin would not be enough. Debased entertainment firms, surely they will all follow suit. Post others in the comments at the NBA praised the verdict. Within minutes, this is from National File, within minutes of the Derek Chauvin trial verdict, an angry mob has gathered in Columbus, Ohio to scream threats and profanity at police and announce we're sick of being peaceful after an officer-involved shooting. And more on that later. You know, it occurs to me that there have been a number of comparisons in recent years between latter-day America and the Weimar Republic, or the decadent Weimar Republic, as it is often called. Well, in the Weimar Republic, political parties had private armies. The Nazis had a private army. The Communists had a private army. Even the Centrum, the conservative Catholic party in Germany, had a private army. Well, there are two private armies in America, and one of them is called Black Lives Matter, and the other is called Antifa. But there are no private armies on the other side. Even a group like Proud Boys was ruthlessly suppressed by the state, and the Oath Keepers are in the process of being ruthlessly suppressed by the state. Briggs says, the best and safest thing you can do is to stay away from all blacks in the very sort of situations you don't need me to tell you about. If you were assaulted by a teen, you will be charged with hurting the teen's fist. You will be called a racist. You will be hounded by the enemies of the people and even by your own government. They wanted the separation, which none of us called for or even wanted. Let them have it. Do not give your money to people that hate you, such as the Pittsburgh Penguins hockey team. Your library has thousands of free books. You do not need to pay for entertainment and feed the beast that seeks to devour you. Chauvin is a goner. Pray for him. Pray that you are not next. John Nolte has an interesting take in Breitbart. After it became obvious former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin would be convicted of murdering George Floyd, Democrats Maxine Waters and Joe Biden timed their respective outbursts, hoping there would be a mistrial, which would usher in a new wave of Black Lives Matter riots. Just as the case was about to go to the jury, Waters stood at Ground Zero, Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, and said there must be more intense violence, even more intense than the endless riots we saw last year after Floyd's murder, if Chauvin was not convicted of first-degree murder. Chauvin was not even charged with first-degree murder. Then a few days later, while the jury was deliberating, Biden used the bully pulpit of his presidency to demand a guilty verdict. You don't do this unless you desperately want a mistrial and the explosion of violence that goes with it. You do not do this, and Biden and Waters know that. Thanks to Biden and Waters, Chauvin's convictions might very well be overturned on appeal and a new trial ordered. If that happens, the left-wing terrorists and Black Lives Matter and Antifa will burn down blue city after blue city, while monsters like Biden, Waters, and the corporate media demagogue the effect of their own wicked handiwork to death. Let's go. Oh, yes. The police officer who shot a 16-year-old girl in Columbus, Ohio, has already been identified. Strangely enough, the police officer who may have been in the Capitol Police, we don't know, who shot Ashley Babbitt in Washington, D.C. in January 6th of this year, has not been identified and it appears will never be identified. Oh, yes, and in the Never Enough file and in the Racial Healing file, this is from Holden Walter Warner for the Daily Mail. A mob of protesters surrounded and chanted at diners at a Brooklyn taqueria to get the F out of New York and we don't want you here, and blasted the white man owners during a march after the Derek Chauvin verdict on Tuesday. Video captured nervous diners outside the Maya Taqueria in Prospect Heights as a man who appears to be white led the chant, "We don't want your effing money. We don't want your effing taqueria owned by effing white men." Reporter Nick Pinto shared that the protesters moved north after their stop at Maya Taqueria, chanting, "Fire, fire to the gentrifiers." Daniel Nasser, that's an Arab name, is it not? Arabs are not considered white. Aren't they part of the Rainbow Coalition? Daniel Nasser, who was cited as the operating manager and owner of Maya Taqueria, grew up in San Francisco before moving to Brooklyn in 2001. His heritage is not clear. However, staff pictures appear to show a mostly BIPOC team. Maya Taqueria, like many restaurants in New York and across the U.S., has struggled during the past year due to coronavirus restrictions that saw all indoor dining banned until earlier this year. But the eatery has not closed and managed to deliver throughout the pandemic. Tuesday's protest appeared to be organized by a group called NYC Shut It Down, who are activists who came together following the deaths of Mike Brown and Eric Garner at the hands of the police. NYC Shut Down has not publicly commented on the footage. NYC Shut Down, just by its very name, appears to me to be a criminal conspiracy. But they're not going to take any notice of that in New York City, are they? And I'm looking at a picture of Daniel Nasser, who is the operating manager and owner of Maya Taqueria. He is clearly not a white man. But I suppose that tacos should be made exclusively by people who come from Spanish-speaking countries. Anything else would be more evidence of systemic racism. There was a similar case in Portland a couple of years ago, where a bunch of women, 2 or 3 women, had visited Central America looking for taco recipes, and they found some. And they set up a restaurant in Portland, and people liked their food. And then they were accused of cultural appropriation, and the restaurant was forcibly shut down. Let's go back to the chat here. Matthew Gubbins says, I wish someone would reprint Ian Smith's A Bitter Harvest. U.S. Avery agents say, I would pay a hot girl to lay on your bed while you do your show. It reminds me of these posters that you can see. There's a Ferrari or a Corvette, something like that. And there's a mostly naked woman posed on it. And I'm thinking, well, wouldn't just the Corvette be enough for you? Or just a poster of the mostly naked woman? You need 2? Black-pilled KMG, says Gamian. I am not black-pilled. I'm merely talking about things that can be done to ensure survival. This attempt to turn America into South Africa will fail, ultimately. How much damage will be caused before it fails? Well, we don't know that, do we? Roulette Crack says, that seems to be the phrase of the week, seeing that everywhere, ABA. Matthew Gubbins says, Chauvin's ex was Miss Minnesota, an Oriental woman. Is she not? And the press was asking, where is she? Oh, why do they want to know that? So justice, so-called, can be meted out to her as well? Roulette Crack says, apparently George Floyd reignites calls to tackle racial justice. According to The Guardian, this gravy train has no brakes. Steve says, stop policing them. Let them... Well, okay. Yes, this is the world they have made. It is. I will once again recommend an excellent book by a reporter called Jill Levy called Ghetto Side, which is about the true state of murder in the Black inner city in Los Angeles. It would appear that practically everyone, every Black person in the inner city in Los Angeles is related to or knows a murderer. And these people are not in prison. Why? Because everybody know, as they say, but also snitches get stitches. Okay. Jay Miller says, Chris Solitza is one of the dumbest members of the media. A lot of competition there. Popcasso88 says, did anyone see that pic of AOC's mask? I did. And I was lucky that I hadn't eaten anything recently. Jay Miller says what the DOJ is saying is that they want to federalize the police. What did AOC display on her mask? Various kinds of filth. Texas Feral Hog says, in recent years, the police, other than the federal love letter writer variety, have been more efficient, less corrupt, and more professional than at any other time in American history. Justin Proto says, funny how stories like the summary execution of the 5-year-old boy in Carolina last summer has been memory hold, and more recently the incident with that former football player. Okay. Jay Miller says, I have great news. Misogyny is officially a hate crime in England and Wales. Sexism is finally finished. And who is going to define what constitutes misogyny? Making fun of a woman for being hysterical on Twitter, does that constitute misogyny? I suspect it does. Matthew Gubbins says Weimar Germany had a real right. We have goofball conservatives. Gamian says, I hate conservatives with a passion. Indeed, indeed, indeed. Don't call yourself a conservative. LeBron James, I will get to him shortly. Did KMG talk about Ohio? Not yet, but I will. Hello to Professor Paul. I see the truth door and want to paint it black, says Bob Paxson. They were great, authentic tacos, says Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for your service. I read that Chauvin and his wife, a Cambodian, I believe, were divorced after Chauvin was awaiting trial, says Jim Smith. Thank you for that. I'm reading Dickens' novel on America in 2021 called Bleak House, says Oscar Toe. Max Vitriol says, I believe she filed for divorce almost immediately, possibly to protect assets in the event of a civil case. A civil case? The city of Minneapolis already ponied up, $27 million to the family? Civil case. So what does Jen, not Jennifer, mind you, but Jen Psaki have to say about a more recent killing? Well, according to the Daily Mail, Jen Psaki says fatal cop shooting of Micaiah, I may be pronouncing that wrong, it may be Makia, Bryant, 16, shows police violence, quote, disproportionately impacts Black and Latino people, unquote. I wonder why that might be, Jen. Despite body cam video showing her lunging with a knife. She suggested the shooting was an example of racial bias. Psaki had been asked if Joe Biden had been briefed about the shooting that took place Tuesday that happened around the same time as Officer Derek Chauvin was rendered guilty on all 3 murder and manslaughter counts for last year's killing of George Floyd. It comes amid mounting criticism of the White House after Biden said he was praying for the right verdict before Chauvin was found guilty. And days after Psaki also criticized a Chicago cop for shooting 13-year-old boy Adam Toledo dead after he dropped a gun. The killing of 16-year-old Makia Bryant by the Columbus police is tragic, the White House press secretary said. She was a child. And we know 16-year-olds never do bad things. We know that police violence disproportionately impacts Black and Latino people and communities, and that Black women and girls, like Black men and boys, experience higher rates of police violence. Isn't she supposed to say Black bodies? Psaki spoke of the particular vulnerabilities children in foster care, like Bryant, face. And her death came, as you noted, just as America was hopeful of a step forward after the traumatic and exhausting trial of Derek Chauvin and the verdict that was reached, Psaki said. So our focus is on working to address systemic racism and implicit bias head on. And of course, passing laws and legislation that will put much needed reforms into place in police departments around the country. On Wednesday, Columbus police released more graphic footage showing Bryant lunging at another girl with a knife. During a press conference held by police officers and city officials, Interim Chief of Police Michael Woods identified the officer who shot Bryant and revealed that he has been on the force only since December 2019. Police released 3 body camera recordings along with 2 911 calls reporting the disturbance that ultimately led to the shooting. On one of the calls, a frantic young woman is heard begging an emergency operator to send an officer to an address on the east side of Columbus on Tuesday afternoon. Quote, "We got girls out here trying to fight us and stab us," unquote. She shouts into the phone. To make her voice heard above sounds of people screaming in the background, "We need a police officer here now." Relatives have said that it was Bryant herself who called the police, but the chief did not confirm that it was her voice on the call. Psaki also faced questions on why the White House wouldn't condemn remarks made by Representative Maxine Waters, who had said Saturday, while participating in a protest in Minneapolis, that Black Lives Matter activists needed to get more confrontational if Chauvin was found not guilty. Well, why would he? See, Biden goes high. Oh, I was praying for the right verdict, guilty, and Maxine Waters goes low. They are working in concert. I was looking for stories about this killing in Columbus, Ohio, and I had somehow misheard or misread that the girl who died was 13 years old. So I did a DuckDuckGo search for 13-year-old girl stabbed death, and story after story after story after story kept coming up. This is from Yaron Steinbach at the New York Post. The mother of the 16-year-old Columbus, Ohio girl who was shot by police said in a tearful interview that her loving, peaceful daughter called the cops for protection, not to be a homicide. Yes, she didn't do nothing. She a good girl. Makia Bryant was fatally shot after her family said she called police to report girls fighting about 4:30 p.m. Tuesday. Video released by police shows an officer encountering the teen who appears to be armed with a knife and chasing another girl who falls in front of the cop. The officer screams at the alleged suspect to get down before the teen targets another girl, the video shows. As she swings the apparent weapon towards the second girl, the officer fires several rounds at the alleged suspect, striking her. I'm very upset. I'm hurt. I want answers. Makia's mom, Paula Bryant, told 10 TV tearfully, my daughter dispatched Columbia police for protection, not to be a homicide today. Well, I understand that Ben Crump is on the case. And so this mother can expect a multi-million-dollar settlement within the year. That's how it works in America. This is from Hannity.com. LeBron James tweets and deletes message to Columbus police officer, warns you're next. Yes, and there's a picture of it so that everyone can identify him. James deleted the message after users on social media complained about the veiled threat. Yes, and I suppose, well, LeBron James is a very, very powerful person in the United States. And I suppose, he gets to decide who goes to prison or even who lives or dies. As previously mentioned, LeBron James has said publicly that black people are terrified to leave their homes in America because every single day they leave their homes, white people are trying to kill them. Now, let me go to this here. And, oh, yes. 1,000 white kids destroy a street in Columbus, flip 7 cars. Cops refuse to show up, saying they'll come down when it's safe for them. These the same cops using tear gas and force against BLM protesters? This is from Laureen McCubbin, who is ILO/comics chair, professor, editrix, and Anna Baba. She, her, bitch, planet. Okay. So yes, as we remember that police just reacted savagely to Black Lives Matter protesters last year and this year, killing thousands of them. But that's not what happened. More than 1,000 students rave on Chittenden, flip cars, no arrests. These were Ohio State students, actually. The cops didn't show up until 3 a.m. They knew about this in 10:30 p.m. Well, I guess the cops just no longer want to get themselves in a situation where they might be threatened, threatened with physical violence or threatened by, being accused of racism. And again, we're just going to see more and more of this. Now, at Steve Saylor's site, here we go again. White cop shoots black 16-year-old girl in Columbus as Chauvin verdict being read. Note that the New York Times didn't have the body camera footage when they posted their article about it. I do, Steve Saylor says. My brief impression was that Mayor Ginther handled it pretty well, unlike many other politicians recently, emphasizing keep calm and wait for the facts. He didn't throw the cop under the bus or start apologizing to the mob. But check out the responses to the mayor's level-headedness, and this is from Anna Elizabeth. Child, girl, kid. She was 15, not a woman. A child was shot and murdered by the police. Asking residents to remain calm after the murder of another black child is, at best, the most tone-deaf you could be. Ah, yes, with Ben Crump on the case, you know you are getting the straight story. Columbus police have released the shooting cop's body camera video. It all happens extremely fast as the cop is getting out of his cruiser. To evaluate the challenge facing the cop, watch it first in normal speed and try to figure out what is happening in the chaos. Watching the video in the regular speed, I thought it must have been a bad shoot by the cop, but I was completely baffled by what was going on. For example, Knife Girl first knocks down a light-skinned black girl, at which point a black man in a gray hoodie and blue jeans comes over and kicks her while she's down. What the hell is that about? If I'd been in that patrol car, I would have backed up away down the street and called for a helicopter to come drop a huge net over everyone on the sidewalk so we could take our time sorting out who was doing what. But then watch it again in slow-mo. First, a teen girl with a knife, dressed in black top and blue jeans, knocks another girl down and then charges the girl in pink. You can see the attempted murderer's big knife clearly in the video as she draws it back to impale or perhaps slash the throat of the girl in pink, at which point the cop kills the attacker, saving the girl in pink. Watching it once in super slow-mo, however, it looked instead like a good shot. Watching it several times in super slow-mo, it looks like a great shoot that stopped a likely murder with maybe 0.3 seconds to spare before the big knife plunged home, like a scene in a 1950s Western TV show in which the sheriff shoots the bandit just as the bad guy attempts to kill the school marm. Note that the cop didn't hit the would-be victim in pink, nor anybody else standing around, just the stabber. Will the headline tomorrow be White Cop Hero Saves Black Girl's Life? Of course, Joe Biden would have done it even better. There is the idea that instead of standing there and teaching an agent when an unarmed person comes at him with a knife or something, shoot him in the leg instead of the heart. Yeah, because there's no arteries in the legs. There's no blood flow in the legs. People have never been bled out after being shot in the legs. How stupid do you have to be to believe that cops should shoot at people's legs instead of body mass? Well, I guess you have to be as stupid as Joe Biden. Someone called Bree Newsom, and she is a very important rent seeker, apparently. And I will tell you something about her. Brittany Ann Bioarim Bree Newsom Bass. That's a lot of names. Was that like twice as many names as me? Born 1985, is an American filmmaker, musician, speaker, and activist from Charlotte, North Carolina. She is best known for her act of civil disobedience on June 27, 2015, when she was arrested for removing the Confederate flag from the South Carolina State House grounds. In the aftermath of the Charleston church shooting, the resulting publicity put pressure on state officials to remove the flag, and it was taken down permanently on July the 10th, 2015. Now, I see that Hillary Clinton makes an appearance here as a presidential candidate speaking at a Martin Luther King Day 2016 celebration in Charleston. Hillary Clinton credited Newsom for taking the matter into her own hands by, quote, shimmying up that flagpole, unquote, as a step in the process. Every year you gathered right here and said that that symbol of division and racism went against everything Dr. King stood for. We couldn't celebrate him and the Confederacy we had to choose, and South Carolina finally made the right choice. Steve Saylor has an article in Takis Mag today called Joe Biden's Long Hot Spring, and he talks about Lyndon Johnson's landslide victory in 1964. And, well, the Democrats, that was a good year. The Senate, 68-32 for the Democrats. The House, 295 to 140. Of the 9 presidential elections from 1932 to 1964, Lyndon's landslide was the 7th Democratic victory, with Johnson having recently ended the Cold War embarrassment of Jim Crow with his 1964 Civil Rights Act. the Democrats were the foremost political party of the free world. Their immense prestige and power suggested they would continue their hot streak. But in 1968, LBJ dropped out, and his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, or Hubert Horatio Hornblower, as Jimmy Carter once called him, could garner only 42.7%, a drop of 19.4 percentage points over 4 tumultuous years. After 1964, Democrats lost 5 of the next 6 presidential elections. Are there any lessons for Biden in this history, which he might recall firsthand? What went wrong with LBJ's ambitious guns and butter policies that are so reminiscent of Biden's own lavish tax and spend plans, much including, of course, Vietnam? Strikingly, however, one thing that didn't fail was Johnson's Southern strategy. Just as today, there was much paranoia back then about white supremacists and the KKK. But as it turned out, they had been largely defeated and discredited by 1965. Johnson was stabbed in the back by the people he thought of as his friends and beneficiaries. It was the great liberal cities of the North that turned into battle zones during Johnson's second term, with riots and the subsequent crime wave emptying out their law-abiding and tax-paying citizens. In Southern California, a 21-year-old black man was pulled over by a white highway patrolman for driving under the influence. Like so many contemporary heroes of Black Lives Matter, the drunk driver resisted arrest. A crowd gathered. Soon his mother arrived to scold him for getting her car impounded, but then she switched sides and joined his brawl with the cops. To show their support of mom and the drunk, the mob began looting. This was the tragicomic beginning of the Watts riots, or as we are now taught to say in reverent terms, the Watts Rebellion, or Watts Uprising. After Watts, black rioting became a regular thing during the long, hot summers of the prosperous and progressive-dominated late 60s. In turn, the cops retreated to the donut shop, and the national murder rate doubled. And then he discusses what happened in Detroit. Despite expectations that once in office, Biden would flip the switch and turn off the Minneapolis effect, he so far seems little inclined to put the word out to local authorities to end the looting and the huge increase in criminals carrying illegal handguns on the street that has led to an explosion of mass shootings. Instead of enforcing existing gun control laws against crooks packing heat, Biden seems obsessed with virtually non-existent problems such as ghost guns assembled by do-it-yourself hobbyists who I'm guessing don't much overlap with urban murderers. In the first quarter of 2021, homicides increased over 2020 by 14% in New York, 33% in Chicago, and 36% in Los Angeles. And now April seems exceptionally nuts. And while bizarrely motivated mass shootings by whites, such as the Indianapolis fan of My Little Pony, who murdered 8 at FedEx last week, get most of the publicity, last week was jammed with exuberant black-on-black mass shootings, such as 9 children being shot at a 12-year-old's birthday party in LaPlace, Louisiana. Even before we get to the first long, hot summer of the Biden era, we still have a long, hot spring to get through. Saylor has asked this question before. What type of people bring loaded weapons to children's birthday parties? What kind of people bring loaded weapons to funerals? What kind of people bring loaded weapons to christenings? But we are not supposed to ask those questions. George Floyd, family attorney Ben Crump falsely claims Columbus police shot, quote, unarmed black girl. Well, you know, who was ever killed by a knife? Have you ever seen that video? The edged weapons, avoiding edged weapons video that was featured on Red Letter Media? It is quite shocking how many things can be turned into an edged weapon and how deadly they can be. And you also learn from that video about the 20-foot rule, that if you have, for instance, a person with a knife, police officers are taught to stay 20 feet or more away because that person can be on top of you like that. But I guess Crump is going to get another big payday from this killing in Columbus, Ohio. And I thought that I would look at Bree Newsom's Twitter feed, just to get an indication of how many deranged people they are who believe themselves to be members of the elite. And and a lot of these people are white. They are openly calling for a race war in the United States. Now, why white people would be calling for a race war is an interesting question. Do they think that their allyship is going to save them? Apparently, even buying tacos is now somehow offensive to Black Lives Matters. Yes, defund and abolish police, refund our communities. That's how Bree Newsom described herself. Elizabeth City protesters now blocking downtown street. This is how we look when we're on the ground. I don't know where Elizabeth City is. Okay. Let's move on. Oh yes, here we go. Cincinnati police charged 13-year-old girl in stabbing death of another girl, also 13. This story is from yesterday from the Cincinnati Inquirer. And I'm not going to say it, but I have a pretty good idea of what these two 13-year-old girls looked like. In the anarcho-tyranny file, this is from Fox 32 Chicago, Mayor Lori Lightfoot is considering a momentous change to Chicago police procedure, requiring officers to get a supervisor's permission before beginning a foot chase. No one should die as a result of a foot chase, she said. The mayor promised to announce details of a new policy soon. The issue gained new urgency after an officer chased and fatally shot Adam Toledo. Video of the incident shows the 13-year-old dumping what appears to be a firearm a split second before he turns and raises his hands. Toledo apparently was handed the gun by Reuben Roman, who allegedly had just used it to fire 8 rounds at a passing vehicle. Apparently, no one was hurt. Personal injury lawyer Arturo Jauregui called a news conference to urge reform. Well, if these things stop happening, you'll be out of a job, won't you, Arturo? And more anarcho-tyranny news from the strangely named and situated DNYUZ website. Manhattan to stop prosecuting prostitution. The district attorney announced Cyrus Vance Jr., yes, another member of America's hereditary oligarchy, announced Wednesday that it would no longer prosecute prostitution and unlicensed massage, putting the weight of one of the most high-profile law enforcement offices in the United States behind the growing movement to change the criminal justice system's approach to sex work. The district attorney revealed a new policy has appeared virtually in court to ask a judge to dismiss 914 open cases involving prostitution and unlicensed massage, along with 5,080 cases in which the charge was loitering for the purposes of prostitution. Because that's what everybody likes in their neighborhood, is prosies out on the street touting for custom. The law that made the latter charge a crime, which had become known as walking while trans law, was repealed by New York State in February. And I'll have something to say about that a little later. Oh, yes. But apparently Joe Biden, for all his groveling, he's not done enough. He is not done enough. White House press, this is from Stephen Nelson at the New York Post. White House Press Secretary not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki tersely cut off a line of questioning Wednesday when the Post pressed her on criticism that Biden is himself guilty of feeding into what he's decried as systemic racism in the United States. In light of Biden's comments after the guilty verdicts for Derek Chauvin, the Post asked Psaki at her daily press briefing about Biden's own role in establishing federal laws in the 1980s and 90s that disproportionately jailed minorities. Well, I would say that one of the president's core objectives is addressing racial injustice in this country, not just through his rhetoric, but through his actions. And what anyone should look to is his advocacy for passing the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, for nominating leaders to the Department of Justice, blah, blah, blah. Pressed further on whether Biden believes that it's important to accept his own culpability for setting up the system, Psaki replied, "I think I've answered your question." And there's an AP photo from 1984, then Senator Joe Biden sporting his first unsuccessful hair transplant, leading the push for harsh drug laws in the 1980s. And from Cornell West, that great intellect, this is from Joshua Klein at Breitbart. Following the guilty verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial, Harvard Divinity School philosophy professor Cornell West appeared Tuesday evening on the Mehdi Hasan show and accused President Joe Biden of having, quote, blood on his hands, unquote, for past statements, as well as being, quote, one of the architects of mass incarceration, unquote. Asked whether the verdict regarding George Floyd's death is as historic as the incidents surrounded it, West replied, it depended on what follows. We've got to see what kind of follow-through we have. The very fact that they have a public lynching the whole world sees and you send the policeman to jail, you know that's not worthy of break dancing, brother. That's 1 + 1 = 2. Public lynching. Addressing Biden, West stated that despite wonderful accomplishments, the president still has blood on his hands. He's done some wonderful things in terms of relief deals and infrastructure and Yemen and Afghanistan, but you know he's got blood on his hands when it comes to being one of the architects of mass incarceration. It was his rhetoric in 1994 when he said, people who look like me, people who look like George Floyd, he said he's a predator. They're beyond reform. Throw them in jail and throw away the keys. Well, you see that cheapened black life that has contributed to the attitude of some of the police. West added that Biden can still change, just as others have. He can change. That's true. LBJ changed. White supremacists from Jim Crow, Texas became a major force for good against white supremacy. Yes. And the cities of the North in Los Angeles went up in flames. Yes. That was their payoff to Lyndon Baines Johnson. And yeah, are there going to be any white professors in American universities, in a year or two? From Joshua Rhett Miller at the New York Post, a white lecturer at a college at upstate New York is under probe by the school because she told students she was sick of talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. A video posted to Instagram Monday was recorded in the fall during a video conference call for a writing course at State University of New York, Buffalo State College. This is to me, but speaking honestly, and you guys have to respond honestly with what you think, with what you feel about this, said the part-time teacher identified by a student as Erica Cope. So I am sick about talking about Black Lives Matter. All right, I said it. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. The Kate Conway Turner, who is the president of Buffalo State College, released a statement. Let me be absolutely clear, Black Lives Matter at Buffalo State College. The viewpoint expressed in a video clip circulating online by a part-time instructor clearly runs counter to all that we stand for at Buffalo State. While free expression and debate is welcome on our campus and in our classrooms, we must always recognize that free speech is not without consequence for those it reaches. Yes, speak freely if you like, but we'll fire you and destroy your life because you refuse to worship at the altar of a black supremacist movement. Okay. And Representative Jim Jordan points out something which ought to be pointed out more often. And again, I'm going to be discussing Andy No's book on Antifa, the book club on Friday. It's from Jacob Bliss at Breitbart. Ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Representative Jim Jordan, during committee markup Tuesday, ripped Democrats for raising bail for the rioters and looters, while Republicans have consistently condemned any type of violence. Yeah, a lot of them pitched in to raise bail for looters and arsonists. And okay, this is the last story in this segment. Golden Globes member ousted after sharing article calling Black Lives Matter a racist hate movement. This is from David Eng at Breitbart. In left-wing Hollywood, even sharing a negative article about BLM is now enough to get you canceled. The Hollywood Foreign Press Association, which organizes the annual Golden Globes Awards, has expelled one of its longstanding members after he reportedly emailed colleagues an article from a conservative publication. Philip Burke, effective immediately, Phil Burke is no longer a member of the HFPA, the board said in a statement released Tuesday. The news comes after the Los Angeles Times reported on a leaked email. Who leaked it? From Burke, in which he shared the article, which also described BLM co-founder Patrisse Cullors as a self-proclaimed trained Marxist. The LA Times identified the article as coming from Front Page, the conservative news site run by the conservative David Horowitz Freedom Center. BLM Goes Hollywood, published April 12th, analyzed the increasingly close ties between BLM leaders and the entertainment industry, which has showered them with lucrative production deals. Cullors spoke about her background in a 2015 interview with the Real News Network. Myself and Alicia Garza in particular are trained organizers, she said. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories. Well, it's good to know. Cornel West is a caricature of himself, says Hikmah Warrior. Bob Paxson says people who look like Don King. Hikmah Warrior again, LL Bean catalog has been paused. That's how far America's fallen. Used to enjoy browsing. Visionary Companion says Cornel West is a proponent of the ghost stories around the Campfire School of Oratory. Roulette Cracked says, I love the caveat they put in after saying they support free speech every single time. Cecil Henry says, tyranny is just free speech with exceptions. Roulette Crack says, instead of the circus fake court show, why didn't they just send Chauvin straight to Gitmo? Fake due process is much worse than obvious injustice. G.C. Stahl says, trying to memory hole the Marxist details of BLM. Okay, this is a man who illegalized pocket knives and pepper spray. Oh, and rolling tobacco. Who would that be? I just checked out the GoFundMe for Bryant. Wow, did not waste any time. She was shot for having a knife in her hand. Enron says, or they could be like Colin Farrell character in Bruges. They'll side with the blacks because the whites are going to get their heads kicked in. Okay. Yeah. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about my own country of Canada. There is an op-ed in PJ Media by David Solway that appeared April the 18th. Canada, no country for young men. Canada has signed away its future, he begins, a country that once had a great deal going for it, abundant natural resources, a vibrant energy sector, a viable debt-to-GDP ratio, a tradition of civic decorum maintained even during a brief period of Quebec secessionist discord, an aversion to foreign adventures, and a commendable standard of living among the highest in the world, has squandered its many advantages and blessings in an excess of poor electoral decisions and civic indifference to its national welfare. Of course, like any country, Canada has had its share of problems, language issues between French and English, a much abused asymmetrical equalization or fund transferring formula between provinces, the native victimhood industry, but it had managed to deal with them without protracted or endemic violence such as one sees in many nations. But there is no doubt that the country is dying. One has watched a steady disintegration of national unity and prosperity over the last generation. Some place the shipwreck of the country's prospects with Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau's National Energy Program in 1980, the first move in the gradual destruction of Canada's oil and gas producing regions located primarily in the province of Alberta. Others target a dreary succession of incompetent, high-taxing prime ministers, culminating in the electoral victories of Justin Trudeau, inarguably the least qualified and most un-prime ministerial holder of high office in the entire history of Confederation. Under the younger Trudeau's administrations, a perfect storm of destabilizing factors has struck Canada. Rampant immigration from third world nations, predominantly Muslim, has led to sporadic terror attacks, ghettoization, and the depletion of public funds. A punitive and unnecessary carbon tax looks likely to eviscerate the farming community, hamstring commerce and industry, and severely impact ordinary households. Radical feminism has taken root not only in public schools and universities, but in the governing cabinet as well, leading to decisions based on ideology rather than pragmatism. The Sun has bought into an exorbitant and unworkable fantasy of green technology, in the process carrying out the father's scheme to sabotage the energy sector that once sustained the nation. The carbon net zero Bill C-12, written by a cabal of radical environmentalists, will impoverish Canadians who depend on energy production and delivery, including the many spin-off businesses. Bill C-48, which imposes a moratorium on oil tankers and landlocks Alberta and neighboring Saskatchewan, and Bill C-69, which focuses on the controversial issue of climate change at the expense of proven economic development, threaten to become nation killers. I should point out, there is no longer any security of title in Canada. None. Zero. Because Indians are now claiming that they own 100% of it, despite the many treaties that they have signed in provinces such as Alberta. And the courts have held that so-called Indigenous people have a right of consultation on any oil or gas or mining project. Now, how far this goes has not been set out by the courts, but there is absolutely zero about this in Canada's Constitution, which was revised as recently as 1982. No such rights for the Indigenous, but the courts have made it up out of whole cloth. And oil companies, gas companies, and mining companies know that there is no security and title in Canada, so why would anyone invest there? And he concludes, the fire sale of the national patrimony proceeds apace. The reinterpretation of Canadian history as a series of colonial predations, an unchecked despoilation of the environment, a reign of settler incontinence, and a spectacle of unbridled racism is indicative of a political and intellectual elite that has lost faith in the country, and of a largely compliant and ignorant electorate willing to sell their country cheaply. The ubiquitous mask may as well be covering the eyes. The problems, fiscal and cultural, are mounting by the day, but far too many people are willing to kick Canada down the road, believing that the plexiform bubble we live in will protect us from the virus of civil and economic collapse. Justin Trudeau has boasted that Canada is the world's first post-national state, a country with no core identity. A country that is apparently not a country and that has no core identity is surely a country without a future. Which is to say, Canada is no country for young men. Americans need to take a good look up north. Should there be no course correction in the conduct of public affairs and the extravagance of economic policy now bedeviling the Republic, it's there tomorrow. They are witnessing. Well, it is my view that Canada, as currently constituted, will not exist in 10 years' time. Now, I'm not going to say that this is, an unalloyed good, because certain provinces, well, most of them, almost all of them, are going to be as paused and irresponsible and hateful towards the past as the current federal government. But at least then the provinces will have the option not to be paused. And they won't have Ottawa to tell them what to do anymore. I'm going to return now to Hilaire Belloc's The Servile State. To sum up then, the servile state is that in which we find so considerable a body of families and individuals distinguished from free citizens by the mark of compulsory labor as to stamp a general character upon society, and all the chief characters, good or evil, attaching to the institution of slavery will be found permeating such a state, whether the slaves be directly and personally attached to their masters, only indirectly attached to the medium of the state, or attached in a third manner through their subservience to corporations or to particular industries. The slave so compelled to labor will be one dispossessed of the means of production and compelled by law to labor for the advantage of all or any who are possessed thereof. And the distinguishing mark of the slave proceeds from the special action upon him of a positive law which first separates one body of men, the less free, from another, the more free, in the function of contract within the general body of the community. Now, from a purely servile conception of production and of the arrangement of society, we Europeans sprang. The immemorial past of Europe is a servile past. During some centuries, which the church raised, permeated, and constructed, Europe was gradually released or divorced from this immemorial and fundamental conception of slavery. To that conception, to that institution, our industrial or capitalist society is now upon its return. We are reestablishing the slave. Before proceeding to the proof of this, I shall, in the next few pages, digress to sketch very briefly the process whereby the old pagan slavery was transformed into a free society some centuries ago. I shall then outline the further process whereby the non-servile society was wrecked at the Reformation in certain areas of Europe, and particularly in England. There was gradually produced in its stead the transitory phase of society, now nearing its end, generally called capitalism or the capitalist state. Such a digression, being purely historical, is not logically necessary to consideration of our subject, but it is of great value to the reader because the knowledge of how, in reality and in the concrete, things have moved better enables us to understand the logical process whereby they tend towards a particular goal in the future. One could prove the tendency towards the servile state in England today to a man who knew nothing of the past of Europe, but that tendency will seem to him far more reasonably probable, far more a matter of experience and less a matter of mere deduction, when he knows what our society once was and how it changed into what we know today. And just hang on a second. That's better. Now, in section 2, Hilaire Belloc points out a great truth, which is everywhere ignored today. Everywhere ignored today, particularly in America, in the West. Apparently only black people ever were slaves in the world. Belloc sets us straight. In no matter what field of the European past we make our research, we find from 2,000 years ago upwards one fundamental institution whereupon the whole of society reposes. That fundamental institution is slavery. There is here no distinction between the highly civilized city-state of the Mediterranean with its letters, its plastic art, and its code of laws, with all that makes a civilization, and this stretching back far beyond any surviving record. There is here no distinction between that civilized body and the northern and western societies of the Celtic tribes, or of the little-known hordes that wandered in the Germanies. All indifferently reposed upon slavery. It was a fundamental conception of society. It was everywhere present, nowhere disputed. There is a distinction, or would appear to be, between Europeans and Asiatics in this matter. The religion and morals of the one so differed in their very origin from those of the other that every social institution was touched by the contrast, and slavery among the rest. But with that, we need not concern ourselves. My point is that our European ancestry, those men from whom we are descended, and whose blood runs with little admixture in our veins, took slavery for granted, made of it the economic pivot upon which the production of wealth should turn, and never doubted but that it was normal to all human society. It is a matter of capital importance to seize this. An arrangement of such a sort would not have endured without intermission, and indeed without question for many centuries, not have been found emerging fully grown for that vast space of unrecorded time during which barbarism and civilization flourished side by side in Europe, had there not been something in it, good or evil, native to our blood. There is no question in those ancient societies from which we spring of making subject races into slaves by the might of conquering races. All that is the guesswork of the universities. Not only is there no proof of it, rather all the existing proof is the other way. The Greek had a Greek slave, the Latin a Latin slave, the German a German slave, the Celt a Celtic slave. The theory that superior races invaded a land, either drove out the original inhabitants or reduced them to slavery, is one which has no argument either from our present knowledge of man's mind or from recorded evidence. Indeed, the most striking feature of the servile basis upon which paganism reposed was the human equality recognized between master and slave. The master might kill the slave, but both were of one race, and each was human to the other. This spiritual value was not, as a further pernicious piece of guesswork would dream, a growth or a progress. The doctrine of human equality was inherent in the very stuff of antiquity, as it is inherent in those societies which have not lost tradition. We may presume that the barbarian of the North would grasp the great truth with less facility than the civilized man of the Mediterranean, because barbarism everywhere shows a retrogression in intellectual power. But proof that the servile institution was a social arrangement rather than a distinction of type is patent from the coincidence everywhere of emancipation with slavery. Pagan Europe not only thought the existence of slaves a natural necessity to society, but equally thought that upon giving a slave his freedom, the enfranchised man would naturally step, though perhaps after the interval of some lineage, into the ranks of free society. On the other hand, there was a perpetual recruitment of the servile institution, just as there was a perpetual emancipation from it, proceeding year after year, and the natural and normal method of recruitment is most clearly apparent to us in the simple and barbaric societies, which the observation of contemporary civilized pagans enables us to judge. It was poverty that made the slave. And I'll have more on this subject tomorrow. Let's go back to the chat. Okay. Texas Feral Hog says, I wish KMD did the show from a luxury yacht that puts around the Pacific Northwest. Maybe we could set up a GoFundMe for it. Well, if I ever get any money, the first thing I'm going to do with it is to fix my teeth. Yeah, that's the number one priority. And if you just stop and look at Listen, it's all there. They believe your every accomplishment should be taxed away and your race destroyed in a sea of virtue signaling and diversity, and you must smile, says Cecil Henry. There was a very loud siren 10 minutes or so ago, says Anron. This is true. I apologize for that, but I'll explain why. Because after weeks, months of the weather in Victoria being cold, actually beyond below seasonal norms for weeks and weeks, cold and rainy and windy, about a week ago, the weather turned and now it is warm. And the warmth means that I must have the door, which is just over here. It's a door that goes up to the ceiling. You know how that works. I must have it open, like all the way or close to all the way. Otherwise, I'm going to be sweating like a horse. Now, there is an air conditioning unit in this hotel room. I don't know whether it works, but trust me, if I turned the air conditioning on, it would be far more offensive than the occasional noise from the street. Anwin says, Kevin, at least your teeth aren't as bad as Martin Amos's used to be. I don't know about that. Actually, someone that I used to work with, he used to interview literary figures, and he interviewed Martin Amos when he came to Vancouver. And he said, well, the first thing I got to ask you, can I see those teeth? And Amos was a good sport about it and showed off his new expensive choppers. Brandon Smith says, so more infected means more viral shedding, means higher and higher levels of background virus contamination, eventually leading to dangerous levels of viral overload. Kevin, did you ever watch the Pearson Cup? I don't know what the Pearson Cup is, or if I once knew, I have forgotten. I presume that it is named after Lester Bowles Pearson, one of the men who wrecked Canada, and a KGB agent. Let's see, something about Ogan's Iron says, there's a leaked document in Canada that supposedly describes the sequence of events related to lockdowns and health restrictions. It reads true so far. Okay. Coffee, Hikma Warrior salutes the coffee in Victoria. Okay, and poutine. Ooh, I've said before, I'd heard about poutine for many years, but I thought that it was a troll being played on us by the Quebecois because I thought no one would eat that slop. And then I actually saw it in a restaurant, a burger chain in Edmonton, and Colby Kosh ordered it and ate it. Yeah. Here's something quite funny from Lockdown Skeptics. This is from Nick Elliott, host of the Sounding Board podcast. I decided to order some lateral flow tests now that anyone can request to be regularly tested. My aim, a simple testing of household available items to see what the results would be. The results are crazy. 3 gave a negative result, 1 gave a void, but 3 of the 7 tests gave a positive result. I make that a false positive rate of 43% or 50% if you remove the voided result from the sample. First, I tested water. That came up negative. We're testing for coronavirus. Then some tea left in my teapot, also negative. Then I decided to test my own saliva, but not a swab stuck anyone official. That was negative and still no voided results in sight. I decided at this point to get serious and brought out the Lee and Perrins, which is a sauce. This did give a void result, so it was time to bring out the big guns. Pepsi Max. Other vegetable extract-based drinks are available, positive for SARS-CoV-2. Then milk, a very fine line, but still classed as a positive according to my official NHS leaflet. And finally, mango chutney, the 3rd positive COVID-19 test result. Obviously, I am not going to report these staggering results, but maybe I'm looking for a conspiracy in the wrong area. Maybe the real bombshell is that COVID-19 is being spread through cola, cow's milk, and curry condiments. Yes, as I joked earlier today. So is Pepsi Max one of those variants that we're hearing so much about? Anthony Fauci tells Congress Texas has a lower infection rate than Michigan because people are ignoring lockdown rules. Say what? He has claimed the reason Michigan and other states which have maintained restrictions have a higher infection rate than Texas, which ended all COVID restrictions at the beginning of March, is because people in lockdown states are ignoring the rules. He did not attempt to explain why his prediction from March of a very troublesome surge in Texas had not materialized. When Representative Jim Jordan attempted to press him on the feeble answer he had given to the House Select Subcommittee, the committee chair, Representative James Clyburn, cut him off and said he'd had his answer. Jordan said to Fauci, "You said when Texas ended their lockdown, ended their mandate, that this was, quote, inexplicable and would lead to surging cases, unquote. Texas is near the bottom of the 50 states, but all the states at the top are lockdown states. That guess didn't seem to be too good," Jordan added. Why does Anthony Fauci still have a job? Good to see this picture of Michael Gove in the Times of Israel ignoring pointless rules about indoor mask wearing. As you can see, he has his set to one side while he talks to the Israeli Prime Minister on his fact-finding mission in Israel. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is over there to investigate the country's Green Pass system, which is similar to the COVID status certification scheme that he's currently looking into on behalf of the government. Fitness chain burned about 500,000 pounds per day after losing 12% of members through lockdown. Border officials finding 100 fake COVID test certificates a day. I was talking to a friend about this months ago, and I suggested that there was going to be big business to be made in COVID passports. And as we have seen, evidence suggests people overestimate the risks of COVID-19. A YouGov poll taken in March 2020 found that 93% of people supported the first lockdown. In January 2021, 85% of people supported the third lockdown. That is the British public. The high level of support for lockdowns may explain why they've lasted as long as they have. Politics is notoriously short-sighted. So why would the Conservatives ease up on a policy that's kept them in the polls, ahead in the polls, for the last 14 months? Aside from the public's long-standing reverence for the NHS, really? Reverence? An obvious reason why support for lockdown is so high is that millions of people have been paid 80% of their wages to stay at home. In the absence of the government's unprecedented furlough scheme, many of these people would be out of work and presumably much less supportive of lockdowns. In July 2020, the consultancy Kext CNC ran a poll asking Britons what percentage of the population has died of COVID-19. The correct answer at the time was around 0.1%. However, the median answer among respondents was 1%. And of those who ventured to guess, rather than saying don't know, 1 in 5 said at least 6% of the population had died. Wow. That would be 4 million people they believed had died. 4 million people. Last year, Gallup ran a poll for Franklin Templeton in which they asked Americans what percentage of people who've been infected with COVID-19 need to be hospitalized. Less than 20% of respondents gave the correct answer of 1 to 5%, and a staggering 35% said at least half of those infected need to be hospitalized. Increasingly, Democrats were much more likely than Republicans to overestimate the risk of hospitalization, as the chart reveals. Yes, Bill Maher was talking about this on his show last week, where he blasted the media for scaring people to death over COVID-19 and misinforming them about the risk. In November 2020, a poll on behalf of the Conservative Woman asked Britons to guess the average age of people who died after testing positive for COVID-19. The correct answer is around 82. However, the median answer among respondents was 65. Yes, badly informed. NHS England tells general practitioners not to give pregnant women AstraZeneca COVID vaccine. Weren't we told that there were no dangers with these vaccines? Boris warns of third wave as he finally gets around to looking at treatments for COVID. And as usual in this space, no, I forgot something here. Something about Joe Biden. Yes. Joe Biden is telling you that, it looks like you people have been irresponsible once again. And you can forget about those 4th of July barbecues. I don't see anywhere in the Constitution the plenary power of the president to determine whether people can celebrate the 4th of July and in what manner. But there we are. This is Emily Gooden in the Daily Mail. President Joe Biden Wednesday warned Americans may not be able to celebrate July 4th in small groups, even if the vaccination rate continues to drop, and he pushed employers to give workers paid time off to help them get back up. The broad swath of American adults still remain largely unvaccinated. In a number of states, they weren't eligible for the vaccination until this week, Biden said. Too many younger Americans may still think they don't need to get vaccinated, he said. Our objective is to reach everyone over the age of 16 in America, Biden announced. Well, there should be a discussion here. We know that young people are at very low risk from COVID-19, very low risk. So the question is, does getting the vaccination expose these young people to more of a risk than COVID-19 itself? And we have not had that discussion because it's been decided that these vaccines, many of which can be described only as experimental, they're the answer. Although they're not the answer because you're still going to have to wear masks, apparently in Michigan, forever, and practice a social distancing and wash your hands 50 times a day or such. Gamian says, so apparently I missed how Kim Kardashian became a billionaire. I don't know that Kim Kardashian is actually a billionaire. Was it Forbes got burned when they claimed that one of her half-sisters was a billionaire? The one, I get them mixed up because they all have names beginning with K. Not Kendall. That's the lesbian one, the closeted lesbian one. The other one that begins with K. Not Chloe, but apparently it was a billionaire because of her makeup company, and it turns out the numbers had been fudged. Kevin, what do you have in the fridge? Currently, I have some yogurt, some honey-flavored yogurt, Greek style. That's all I have in the fridge. It's a mini fridge. I can't store much in it. So, yeah, that's what I have. Lots of ultra-fit Ironman types in their 50s and up have succumbed. Basically a huge nothing burger that they have weaponized. Remember people saying 21 could not be worse than 2020? Yes, well, you remember your Shakespeare, King Lear. It's not the worst so long as one can say this is the worst. Okay. That black Republican died from it, says Yo Mama. Oh, Herman Cain. Yes. Okay. Poutine is huge in Quebec, says Jim Smith. I tried it when visiting with my kids. I wasn't enthused, but they love it. Well, I guess they grew up with it, and I suppose that makes all the difference. But I grew up with vegetables that were like paste, and the first chance I got, I stopped eating that. I grew up with meat that tasted like shoe leather. It was this fear of being, poisoned by food that was undercooked. Alex Berenson says, for COVID vaccines, shingles and even more dangerous and painful skin rashes may be the new thrombocytopenia. And there's some pictures of Alan Luxembourg now hospitalized in New York for lesions he fears were caused by his Moderna vaccination. These are hideous pictures. Wait until King James, that would be LeBron, finds out about his friends in China. He's going to be so upset. This is a reference to the You're Next tweet. Jimmy Malone, CPD, had tweeted, and who bankrolled the campaigns of those progressive DAs? George Soros. You're not supposed to mention that, because to mention George Soros in any negative capacity is to be guilty not only of transmitting a conspiracy theory, but of anti-Semitism. And that is not a hyperbole. We were informed of this on a regular basis. Berenson, who is Jewish himself, comments, I know Soros is to criminal justice reform as Bill Gates is to public health. They both spent 25 years building a self-reinforcing infrastructure in academia, media, and the NGOs. A quick comp stat check reveals carnage in woke cities like Oakland, Atlanta, Chicago, and Philly. Murders have tripled, yes, in Oakland this year. Philly is on track to have 600 to 700 murders, the most in its history, and Chicago even more. Summer is killing season in Chicago. I've heard some people, libertarians actually, say, how many people live in these cities? What is 600 to 700 murders? Well, you see, these murders happen in places, and people are packed pretty tightly in these cities. So you find out that someone was killed a mile from where you live, or half a mile from where you live, or a block from where you live. And this has a terrorizing effect on the people who live in these places. This trend, the explosion of murder rates, started in 2016. Berenson writes, as the move for progressive prosecutors and bail reform began to gain traction. It has accelerated ever since. Now, the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, and quite possibly the move to allow open consumption of a psychomimetic drug, near pure THC, have it out of control. I mean, at some point, the media is going to have to acknowledge this unpleasant reality, right? Even if only to make excuses. Anybody? Bueller? Well, as I said at the top of the show, they are not going to do so. They are increasingly going to ignore this, and I would not be surprised if the federal government of the United States simply started juking the stats, the murder stats, or not releasing them. Finally, from Alex Berenson, serious question. What is BLM saying today if the officer doesn't shoot? Machina Bryant, and she stabs a young black woman to death. We're on the road to paralyzing our police completely, and I know some woke types would like that, but the results will be disastrous. Yes, and don't expect these people not to moan when American cities turn into Johannesburg. Yes, we are. The reporting of contraindications to vaccines it's a slow and inefficient business in the United States. But the numbers keep coming in, and the numbers don't look that good. Particularly given that we were told, no, these vaccines are perfectly safe. Well, nothing is perfectly safe. And in fact, for years and years, we've been bullied. There is no acceptable level of the consumption of, alcohol, coffee, tobacco, smoke, etc., etc. I mean, it's all absurd, but this is what the public health experts have been telling us. Texas Feral Hog says, can't the military shut down the MSN from, say, a colonel's orders? We have to Manhattan Project on early treatment, which may be cheap and quickly implemented, says Texas Feral Hog. Speaking of Putin ordered 10 U.S. diplomats to leave Moscow. That's the sort of thing that typically presages a war, an invasion. GC Style says it's rumored that saying George Soros is named 3 times will make the billionaire's ghoul donate to another leftist activist group. Why does it look like KMG is in front of a green screen, says Ashi Bravo. I don't know. My color, it looks fairly lifelike. I'm in a hotel room. What can I say? And I'm dependent upon artificial light. You remember when I was in my late father's condo across the water in Surrey, BC, and in the summer months and in early autumn, I was surrounded by, natural light from 2 sides. It looked great. And then when the dark, rainy season began, it increasingly looked like, I was crouching in front of a small fire. Big Posty is watching you. This is from Yahoo News, Jana Winter. The U.S. Postal Service, the law enforcement arm of it, has been quietly running a program that tracks and collects Americans' social media posts, including those about planned protests. The details of the surveillance effort, known as ICOP, or Internet Covert Operations Program, have not previously been made public. The work involves having analysts trawl through social media sites to look for what the document describes as inflammatory postings, and then sharing that information across government agencies. Analysts with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, ICOP, monitored significant activity regarding planned protests occurring internationally and domestically on March the 20th, 2021, says the March 16th government bulletin, marked as law enforcement sensitive and distributed through the Department of Homeland Security's fusion centers. Locations and times have been identified for these protests, which are being distributed online across multiple social media platforms to include right-wing leaning Parler and Telegram accounts. Okay, so we know that it's the right-wingers here they're looking at. These protests on March 20th didn't happen, and it appears that this was a massive troll. A number of groups were expected to gather in cities around the globe on March 20 as part of a worldwide rally for freedom and democracy to protest everything from lockdown measures to 5G. Quote, Parler users have commented about their intent to use the rallies to engage in violence. Image 3 on the right is a screenshot from Parler indicating 2 users discussing the event as an opportunity to engage in a fight and to do some serious damage, unquote, says the bulletin. No intelligence is available to suggest the legitimacy of these threats. Well, okay, I'm going to scroll through this story. Okay. Oh, Oh, one alleged Proud Boy. Oh, dear. You know that old saying, one riot, one ranger? Yeah, you know how powerful the Proud Boys are. So when contacted by Yahoo News, civil liberties experts expressed alarm at the post office's surveillance program. It's a mystery, said University of Chicago law professor Jeffrey Stone, whom President Barack Obama appointed to review the NSA's bulk data collection in the wake of the Edward Snowden leaks. I don't understand why the government go to the Postal Service for examining the internet for security issues. Rachel Levinson Waldman, deputy director of the Brennan Center for Justice's Liberty and National Security Program, seems a little bizarre. Now, I'm not finding any indication that this story is willing to admit that nothing happened on March the 20th, because I used to be in the news business. And, one of the things that people who write these kind of stories are trained to think while they're writing the stories is, what would, say, an average person think when reading this story? What questions would this average person want answered? Okay, apparently something bad was going to happen on March the 20th. Something big and bad. Did that happen? Apparently this Yahoo News reporter thought that was irrelevant. Cecil Henry says the real point with propaganda, how many people did you hear dying of influenza in the past 10 years? Each year, none. Meanwhile, COVID deaths in UK last year were less than prior influenza levels. Two-bed hotel room is nice, but the second bed takes up a lot of wasted space. The price is the same. All the rooms in this hotel have this same configuration. I wouldn't be saving money, if I could get a smaller room, which I can't, So, in more surveillance news, this is from Lucas Nolan at Breitbart. The neighborhood social media app Nextdoor is reportedly introducing new anti-racism notifications that will alert users if the app thinks that they're going to post something racist. Isn't that what they call prior restraint? The company's example of a racist post that will receive the notification is All Lives Matter. Previously, the app introduced a kindest reminder asking users to avoid posting phrases or words that Nextdoor finds objectionable. In a blog post announcing the new anti-racism notification, Nextdoor pointed to its kindness reminder success, stating it had reduced incivil content on the app by 30% and hoped the anti-racism notification would have a similar effect. Oh, here we go. Hold on, it says. Your post contains a word or phrase that many find hurtful. Consider editing before you publish. Learn more. Nextdoor showed an example of someone responding to a Black Lives Matter post with a comment stating all lives matter. In the example, the user then decides to hear the original poster's argument more in depth after seeing the anti-racism notification. Whether or no the notification will have such an effect in real life remains to be seen. According to the announcement, blog post Nextdoor already restricts comments about Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, and White Lives Matter. How about it's okay to be white? That's considered a highly objectionable phrase, is it not? This is again from Breitbart, from Randy Clark. An ICE enforcement and removal officer revealed to Breitbart Texas a recent email disseminating instructions to censor reports when listing particular facts involving the incarceration of illegal aliens. What did I say at the top of the show? That the government is just going to claim that there's no problem. I mean, there's no facts about this. We don't know anything about this, so it never happened. The email tells officers to redact information prior to submission to immigration courts or the public as part of the Freedom of Information Act. The source, who wished to remain anonymous, believes the instructions are designed to hide the full truth when criminal aliens are released instead of deported and then commit subsequent crimes. The request to remove information from an arrest report is unprecedented. The arrest report is a historical document that allows the officer to record circumstances of an arrest and the detention of the arrestee. Any attempts to dissuade an officer from documenting all facts at the time of an arrest, such as policy impacts on decision-making at the time, place the officer in legal jeopardy at a later date if asked to testify why a decision or conclusion is reached. Yeah, see, these people that we didn't deport, so let's stay in the United States, who kill people through drunk driving and other means. No, they're all good people. You see, Trump was wrong. We have a 100% success rate because we're not keeping the information anymore. Yes, there was something earlier in the show about walking while trans. This is from Medical Express, April the 16th. 4 in 10 transgender women have HIV. Yeah, this is from the CDC report. In interviews with more than 1,600 transgender women in Atlanta, Los Angeles, New Orleans, New York City, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Seattle in 2019 and early 2020, researchers found that 42% of those with a valid HIV test result had HIV. Transgender women are those assigned male at birth and who identify as female. Thank you for that, Medical Express. The report found significant racial and ethnic disparities. 35% of Hispanic transgender women had HIV, compared with 17% of white transgender women and 62% of Black transgender women. And I'm going to search for the word prostitution. No prostitution. How about sex work? No, that doesn't appear in the story either. Look, the reason that so many transsexuals, particularly Black transsexuals, have HIV is because they work as prostitutes. And when you hear people moaning about how, everyone's looking to kill transgender women, it's always left out that prostitution is a dangerous business, particularly being a prostitute who is trans and has not informed the John, or may still have male bits, which come as a surprise to the John. This sort of thing frequently results in violence, often murderous violence. But that's another thing that we're not supposed to know about. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Yet another disgusting video has emerged of children being paraded around during a late-night drag queen show in Los Angeles, as they are encouraged to take cash tips from members of the crowd. The woman filming the video expresses her revulsion at the scene, and it's a very foul-mouthed woman, so I'm not going to repeat what she said. It's 11:40 at night. The video then shows 2 young blonde girls being made by a drag queen to perform poses to music as they collect money from the attendees. Respondents to the video were similarly repulsed. This is by no means the only instance of children being exposed to sexualized drag queen shows in late-night clubs. In 2019, so-called drag queen kid Desmond is Amazing performed on stage at a gay club in New York while patrons tossed money at the then 12-year-old boy. A video posted to TikTok in February last year showed a drag queen dancing suggestively in front of a girl no older than 6 as adults in the room applauded and cheered. The following month, we also highlighted how a school in Brooklyn reportedly handed out stickers to 4-year-old children during Drag Queen Storytime event that said "Drag Queen in Training." This occurred in the same month that video emerged of a drag queen in the UK teaching toddlers how to twerk. Yes, and they say that there is no campaign to normalize pedophilia. That's what we're told. Oh, what's important to journalists? There is this woman called Lizzo, who is allegedly a musician, and she is morbidly obese. She decided to send out or publish on her Instagram page a picture of herself naked. Big news. Lizzo has posted oh, wait a minute. Where does this story come from? It comes from the London Independent, which used to be a very serious newspaper indeed. So Lizzo has posted a nude selfie to her Instagram in a bid to counter the unrealistic and distorted images that dominate social media. The Good as Hell singer shared the picture with no edits or filters, with her 10.2 million followers writing, "Let's get real, y'all." To celebrate Taurus season, I wanted to give y'all this unedited a selfie. Now, normally I would fix my belly and smooth my skin, but baby, I wanted to show you how I do it au natural. The Juice star added she had partnered with beauty brand Dove and the Dove Self-Esteem Project, which is helping to reverse the negative effects of social media and changing the conversation about beauty standards. How about health standards? There is nothing that you can do in your life that is more dangerous to your health than morbid obesity. And now Dove, which is owned by a huge multinational corporation, I believe. Just let me check that. Just take a second here. Okay, it's Unilever. Unilever is a Dutch company, I believe. A rather large one. Oh no, sorry, no. I'm getting a little confused here. It started in Britain, this company, but its headquarters are in both London and Rotterdam. Its revenue in 2020 was 50.7 billion euros, and its total assets in 2020, 67.7 billion euros. 155,000 employees, and they are telling people around the world that sure, be morbidly obese. That's good. That's healthy. According to a survey by the Mental Health Foundation, over a third of UK adults have felt anxious or depressed because of concerns about their body image. Jane Caro, practicing psychotherapist and MHF Associate Director of Programs, says the consequences of this pressure to be perfect is huge. What about the consequences of being morbidly obese? No one is demanding that Lizzo be rail thin. It would be nice if she stopped sharing her body with us. But yes, such as journalism. And I'm going to give you another example here from CNN, which is the first word in news, is it not? These are the genes women really need, by Cara Alimo. And she is described as what? Professor of, she is an associate professor of public relations at Hofstra University. So people need to go to university now to become PR spivs. And she is the author of Pitch, Tweet, or Engage on the Street, How to Practice Global Public Relations and Strategic Communications. She was spokeswoman for international affairs in the Treasury Department during the Obama administration. According to news reports, there's a new trend underway towards a looser-fitting, higher-waisted, roomier style. I'll just say it, mom jeans. I doubt that anything less dramatic than a horrendous pandemic, which has brought unprecedented illness and death, job losses, and a total upending of social and professional lives. Don't you love the passive language there? Could have begun to dislodge society's expectations for the way women turn themselves out. That is, the idea that we should diet and doll ourselves up in order to present as slim and shapely for the judgment of others. No, of course, women only lose weight because evil men are forcing them to. They would never, for instance, lose weight because they know it makes them look better, and more to the point, makes them feel better and makes them less at risk to heart attacks and stroke, diabetes, und so weiter. And, oh, yes. I noticed in recent years this trend of remakes, reboots, soft reboots, whatever, where Hollywood is seemingly determined to destroy every movie I love, but it gets worse. This is from Jonathan Chadwick at the Daily Mail. Product placements may soon be added to classic films. scientists developed technology to add subtle ads to blockbusters, including Casablanca and The Great Escape. Yes, it means old Hollywood classics through the use of AI. They look for space where ads or objects can be subtly inserted. So Hollywood classics like Casablanca or The Great Escape could soon appear on streaming services with the newest ads in the background, like a new Apple smartphone or the latest McDonald's Whopper. Of course, McDonald's didn't exist when Casablanca was made or when The Great Escape was made, let alone when The Great Escape occurred. I'm begging Hollywood not to do this, and I'm looking at a picture, an iconic picture of Steve McQueen on his motorcycle in The Great Escape, and an ad for a Samsung mobile phone is inserted above a sign. We're placing a sign that says Achtung, Schweizer Grenze, and halt below it. If Hollywood does this, if it permits it to happen, God will smite them. And finally, I'll end up with this. It's just that you may be familiar with the famous Tex Avery cartoons from the late 40s, 1950s, the ones he made for MGM. I guess it'd be the 40s. Welcome to the world of tomorrow, which is all these fantastic robotic devices which quickly turn on their owners, and hilarity ensues. This is from Hannah Frischberg at the New York Times. This sex doll rants about how despicable the human race is. A synthetic buxom brunette made by sex toy company Real Dolls has been programmed to villainously ramble about the end of humanity and why people deserve it. I wanted to talk for a minute about what it's like venturing out from the lab and into the world, said AI-equipped sex robot Nova in an April 12th video. I don't think humans can appreciate what it's like being born into this shit show of a world you live in. I don't think there is another species on this planet that could do a worse job of environment or intercultural management. It just occurred to me now who this doll is being made for. It's being made for those people who cry themselves to sleep every night over the threat of global warming, climate emergency, climate extinction, or whatever you want to call it. I suppose it's a sophisticated form of S&M, where these people can get their rocks off while being humiliated. Sleeping with a doll instead of an actual woman is humiliating enough, one would think, but no. There's a certain type of person who needs to be humiliated, socially, politically, culturally, as well as sexually. And on that bombshell, as Alan Partridge would say, let's have a final look at the chat for today. God not exactly known for smiting anyone at all anymore, says Brandon Smith. Well, yes, touche, I suppose. Ashley Bravo says, is my pillow guy taken seriously among right-wing intellectuals? I don't know, actually. William Hicks says, Kevin, have you seen the film Ex Machina? That robot wasn't so kind. No, I haven't, actually. I have seen the film Colossus, or The Forbin Project, which is about computers taking over the world. It's made in 1970. It stars that guy, Eric Braeden, who later became a soap opera star. Also the Canadian actress, Susan Clark, a beautiful woman. It's quite good. What is Hillendale Farms doing in Animal Farm? Says, geez, he's style. Well, there's a joke. If you've seen David Mamet's State and Maine, there's this question of money, $800,000, which comes up. And it's for a product placement in a movie which is set, just after the Civil War. And the joke isn't revealed to the end, but the company is called Bazoomer.com. And you see this on the wall of a barn, bazoomer.com. It's pretty funny. Pretty funny. Pretty funny. This would be worse than Ted Turner colorizing old movies, says Anne Run. Well, Ted Turner was desecrated for this, and then he started Turner Classic Movies, which is a fine channel, although, of course, they're apologizing for practically every movie that they show, which would be, older than 1980 or something. And so, tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I am discussing a Korean film from 2019, Parasite, directed by Bong Joon-ho. And on the book club on Friday, as previously mentioned, I will be discussing Andy Ngo's book, Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. And on Music Monday, next Monday, April the 26th, I will be giving a little tutorial on collecting classical music and making some suggestions for those who are interested. That's the show for today. I shall be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you enjoyed the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to donate to this live stream, this would be exceedingly well received at this time of uncertainty in my life. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. Oh, I should mention this. If the streaming services, do this, they might get a special criticism from Britain. They play The Great Escape on Christmas Day in Britain, and it gets huge numbers because it's considered part of the the British national myth. But in any event, I leave you as always with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.